Chainsaw Man movie, Chainsaw Man Reze arc, Chainsaw Man but with soul, according to the most annoying Twitter account you know, whatever you want to call it, it's finally here and it looked absolutely phenomenal to absolutely no one's surprise. The Chainsaw Man movie is remarkable in every sense of the word. It's what happens when some of the most creative, talented and influential artists in an industry come together to work on a project they're passionate about. It's artistry at its finest. From the overall direction and storyboards to the level of pen-on-paper animation, from the general aesthetic to the amount of polish, this movie was spectacular, damn near perfect, and as such, let's break down the visuals, or at least try to. Make sure to subscribe, that would be very soulful of you. I don't know, I'm running out of call to actions. Just press the subscribe button, it takes a second and it helps out a lot. You can also become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, custom badges and emojis, shoutouts and more. Just go down there and press the join button. Now, let's be honest for a second, it's practically impossible for me to cover this movie from start to finish. It's way too well animated for something like that. Look, pretty much the entire thing is up on Sakugaboru, right? There's no way I can realistically cover every single impressive shot. We'd be here for days if I tried. As such, instead of going over individual scenes and sequences, we'll go over chunks of this movie, breaking the animation down in bulk, if that makes sense. Of course, I will focus on some of the more high-level sequences, but by and large, I'll speak in generalities. It's not ideal, I know, but it's the only practical way for me to cover this visual powerhouse of a movie. I hope you guys don't mind. Before we talk about the visuals in detail though, let's briefly go over the staff. This movie was directed by the one and only Tatsuya Yoshihara, best known for directing, you guessed it, Monster Musume. And a few other shows that aren't that important. What's that, Black Clover? I don't even know what that is. Jokes aside, Yoshihara is an incredible artist, one of the most competent names in the industry, and this movie was him at his best. Well, almost at his best, more about that later. He wasn't the only director involved though. He was accompanied by assistant director Masato Nakazono, one of the most important figures for the first season of this show, assistant director Hone, 6 storyboard artists, 4 unit directors and 5 assistant unit directors. Very fragmented, yes, but hey, that's modern anime for you. Over on the animation side of things, this movie had one chief animation director and character designer Kazutaka Sugiyama, which is actually really impressive given the sheer amount of movement and the complexity of the designs. Of course, certain sections of this movie did their own thing design-wise, and 26 other animation directors were credited alongside Sugiyama, but still very cool. Chainsaw Man superfan doing Chainsaw Man superfan things, you love to see it. By the way, in case you were wondering, yes, that lengthy AD list and the checks notes, 154 second key animators isn't exactly ideal, far from it, but it's not exactly a surprise given both the state of the anime industry and Studio Mappa's track record. It's pretty much as good as it gets in this day and age. Hey, all I'll say is creating a movie this ambitious should ideally take a lot longer than it did. Interpret that how you will. With all that out of the way, let's finally talk about the visuals. The movie opened up with a stylized sequence that can only be described as a moving manga, although that doesn't mean the team took shortcuts and relied on still frames. Oh no, that's not the kind of project this is. The sequence featured lifelike, consistently animated motion drawn by Moang, who's known for lifelike, consistently animated motion. Funny how that works. Even the seemingly simple shots, like this walk cycle, had so much bounce to them, subtle but very fluid for lack of a better term. Plus, the 3D background conveyed an accurate in an uncanny way sense of speed and distance. Really cool stuff, an excellent way to open the film. Before we move on, I'd like to take a second and not tell you about the sponsor of this video, there isn't one. I'd like to talk about some of the stylistic decisions this movie made and how it differed from the TV show. Scared you for a second, didn't I? Let's start with the designs. They looked different, obviously. Compared to season 1, the designs were a bit sharper, with the upper eyelids having a stronger edge, the eyes themselves lacking those standard light bubbles, and the proportions being more loose, for lack of a better term, being more lenient. The main difference, however, wasn't the designs themselves, it was their reinforcement. I'll explain. As we all know, season 1 of this show loved sticking to the base design sheets. Not as much as people think. You still had the likes of Hironori Tanaka, Takuya Ninuma and Hisashi Mori doing their own things design-wise, but by and large, the drawings were very on-model, controversially so. The movie designs, on the other hand, were a lot more malleable. The animators were allowed to mess with them more, if that makes sense. The drawings were more idiosyncratic with more artistic nuances, making it to the final product compared to season 1. Whether or not that's a good thing is entirely up to you. I personally am fine with both approaches. Besides all that, the line processing was thicker and more uneven compared to the TV anime, and the color use was more vibrant, flat and less diffused, collectively giving this project a stylized, aesthetically pleasing look. Really good stuff. Anyway, with that impromptu comparison fest out of the way, let's get back to the breakdown. Anyone who complains about this video being poorly structured is being shot between the eyes. Motherfucker, let's see you try to sum up 90 minutes of non-stop high-level Sakuga in one single video, you c***s. The first proper section I'll cover is the daytime segment, aka the first 25 minutes or so, excluding the Moang scene I just talked about and the OP, basically just the Makima date and the coffee shop scenes. This section was easily the weakest / least ambitious from this movie, but don't get misconstrued, it was still really well animated and arguably the most polished. The drawings were absolutely fantastic with top-notch AD supervision throughout the entire section as expected, and the framing / storyboards were really well done. The spacious, dynamic and buzzword alerts cinematic compositions kept things interesting visually speaking. In case you were curious as to who storyboarded this section, I don't even know if it was one guy or if multiple people were involved, but some of the scenes do look a bit Yoshihara-pilled, especially the more depth-heavy compositions and some of those comedic scenes, although that can just be his influence as the series director. Regardless, point is, very strong drawings throughout, very solid storyboards, and of course, amazing animation. The name of the game here was subtlety. The movement / animation wasn't overtly in your face, but it was very strong, fundamentally speaking. Every action was perfectly drawn. If Reze bumped shoulders with Denji, her hair and outfit would move appropriately. If she moved her hair would move accordingly. You get the idea. The movement was never lacking. It was exactly what you'd expect from a less important scene belonging to a high-profile movie. It was perfect. The lively acting at multiple points, the impressive full body mechanics, the more quirky shots, incredible, all of it. Even the simple fluttering flag looked gorgeous. The phenomenal shading courtesy of Sota Yamazaki gave it so much depth and volume, again subtle but strong. Of course, this section had a few over-the-top shots. It is Chainsaw Man at the end of the day, of course it did. Power Sponge, animated by Benjamin Foray, was wonderfully snappy and powerful, no pun intended. It had a classic stock background and around 11 frames of build-up followed by a quick energetic release. We also had Yuto's cut, which was chaotic in the best possible way. The frame rate near the start was intentionally low, with large, choppy jumps between poses serving as the build-up and the smooth slow-motion shot animated on twos being the payoff. Also worth mentioning, the exaggerated, cartoonish body language on Denji, something I've covered before in a trailer breakdown and something Yoshihara likes to do, looked great. Shortly afterwards, we got the Saki scene. The ominous red color scheme, perfectly complemented by the blue blood, looked really eerie. I loved it. Of course, that nuanced acting I was talking about was present throughout this entire scene, this time thanks to the penmanship of animator Manabu Akita, best known for being a pivotal part of Attack on Titan Season 4. Now, once again, as much as I'd like to go over every single shot in detail, I just can't, there's simply too much. Nearly every single shot moved, and the few that didn't had other visually captivating stuff going on, be it the framing or the drawing power, and this is the weakest portion of the movie, there's more to come. I hope you understand my dilemma. Moving on, the next section I want to talk about isn't really a section, it's more like a sequence. It's the Mysterious Man scene, animated by character art extraordinaire Takuya Niinuma, who also directed and storyboarded a huge chunk of this movie, more about that later. First things first, look at the character art, just look at it. Done? Now look at it again. You just don't see art like this in anime, I can say that confidently and without fear of contradiction. Niinuma is one of the most unique artists in the industry. More about his style, his artwork is very rounded, if that makes sense. You rarely see him draw sharp edges, plus the way he exaggerates the cheekbones, elongates the jaw and draws those curve-heavy shadows is easily recognizable. Of course, it's not just his art that's incredible, it's also the animation. The character acting here was eerily lifelike and consistent with top-notch volume control, which coupled with the unorthodox artwork made the scene feel extremely sinister and dark. Also, the lighting and the backgrounds looked really grimy in a good way, and you know what, let's talk about the background art and compositing for a second. Why not? Video structure? What the f does that even mean? Both the art direction and the compositing in this movie were really good, not exactly a surprise since the TV anime excelled at those departments as well, and the same people were in charge this time around, Yusuke Takeda and Teppei Ito respectively. I'll provide examples later, but long story short, while the style of line processing and color use was different this time around, the actual style of photography and backgrounds was the same, it's just that the scale was a bit larger and the polish was higher, which, it's a movie, of course it was. Anyway, back to the breakdown, the next section I want to talk about is a big one, it's the nighttime school scene. And good f***ing god did it look insane with a capital I. Unlike the previous segment, we actually know who storyboarded and directed this scene. It was Takuya Ninuma, and initially I thought a chunk of it was animated by him as well, since his signature poses and character art was present throughout the entire thing, but apparently that wasn't the case. It's just his influence as the episode director and storyboard artist seeping into the actual drawings, mainly thanks to his directorial corrections. We've seen it happen before with Jujutsu Kaisen. Another aspect we need to talk about is the color use. It was incredible throughout this entire movie, but it was particularly evident during this section. The entire segment was very blue heavy. Besides the roof scenes and that one red filled shot, the entire thing relied on various shades of blue, but at no point did it feel one note or boring. Thanks to color designer Naomi Nakano and additional color scripts made by Licton, this section ended up being one of the most visually captivating ones from the movie. It looked absolutely picturesque. Colors aside, the actual direction and animation throughout this entire scene was absolutely perfect. As expected, it was a treasure trove of spatial layouts, extremely lifelike acting, and the aforementioned Ninuma-built drawings. More about the animation, it somehow stepped up a notch from the already high baseline here, and this is the part where we talk about Shoichi, the quote-unquote main animator of this movie. Shoichi is quite new to the industry. In fact, she made her professional debut with the first season of this very show under director Ryu Nakayama, but despite that, it's obvious that her pen game is unmatched. She excels at drawing natural movement, and that skill coupled with Ninuma's supervision made this scene special. It was basically a perfected version of JJK Season 2 Episode 14. Shoichi animated several minutes of content for this movie, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially given the large amounts of movement, the complex compositions, and the high-level drawings. Hats off, I'm not wearing one, but if I was, I would take it off. This entire section had two main highlights, the first being the pool scene near the start, which was stunning in every sense of the word. The aforementioned color use, the gorgeous drawings, the incredible effects, it was absolutely phenomenal, plus the natural, lifelike acting and the unique compositions with the cherry on top. The second highlight was the rooftop scene, and it was kinda crazy how easily the team switched from gorgeous to sinister. The same natural acting and beautiful drawings that made the pool scene wholesome made this scene eerie. The lively body language now conveyed desperation, the expressive faces now conveyed an upsetting, something's wrong vibe. It was genius. The rain around this section was handled in the same manner as the rain from that one Jujutsu Kaisen episode, which in turn was handled in the same manner as the rain from Kizumonogatari. Basically, they animated the white rain lines separately and added them on top of the character cells during compositing. At least that's what I believe they did. The roof segment also featured a short bit of action, and it was very interesting, relying on quick, interrupted close-ups and that eerie, realistic body language. Like seriously, just look at this guy struggling, it's so insanely well animated. Plus we got some large-scale background animation near the end, which was quite consistent if we ignore that tiny bit of jank near the end. And speaking of jank, I hate to do this, but this is the part where some of the rough edges of the movie started to show, and yes, there were quite a few of them. Of course, neither are these issues significant nor are they abundant, but this is an animation breakdown, call it nitpicking, but I have to point this stuff out. Denji emerging from the pool here looked really rough with poor drawings and janky movement, and inconsistently drawn Reze walked in place in this shot. This cut melted a fair bit, you could see the proportions and outlines shift significantly between frames. This low angle shot was quite stiff and not particularly well drawn. Basically, it's not perfect if you know what to look for. Still, issues and all, the school scenes looked absolutely gorgeous. Ninuma's direction, storyboards and corrections coupled with Shoichi and the rest of the team's animation made this sequence one of the highlights of the movie. The next section was the festival stuff, and it too was directed and storyboarded by Takuya Ninuma, and it too looked incredible. These shots were interesting. They tried to replicate the look and feel of a handheld camera with the intentionally low frame rate and the heavy blurring resembling the low shutter speed and shallow focus. Really creative stuff. Of course, the drawings themselves were stunning. They had that classic Ninuma flair I talked about, plus the compositing was top-notch and the use of negative space was amazing. The characters against the black sky looked perfect. The festival scene was shorter and not as animation heavy as the school scenes that preceded it, but it was still very, very solid. And that brings us to the action. Good god, we are Lord knows how many minutes in, and I haven't even started with the combat. I feel bad for future me who has to edit this nightmare of a video. The first proper action sequence was animated by Reiki Matsura, which is only fair. The new devil designer gets to animate the first two devil appearances. It just makes sense, doesn't it? The sequence itself was decent, although not perfect. The background animation near the start was quite stiff and not particularly consistent, plus Matsura drew patches of grass here despite the fact that there's no grass on the near side of the fence. Just a silly little continuity error, it's not a big deal. Reze's transformation was extremely ambitious with a ridiculous number of lines and shapes, plus the complex camera work and high frame rate made this sequence extremely difficult to execute, which is probably why it wasn't executed all that well. You can see some pretty significant melting, especially around the arm, although the volatile feel of the entire thing makes it more palatable. We also got some stylized background animation, beautiful drawings and dynamics, somewhat Yoshihara built camera work, so at least there's that. The fight, if you can call it that, between Reze and the private devil hunters was insane, with some aggressive foreshortening near the start, not the only cut of its kind in this movie, and some really smooth background animation. By the way, it was such a genius idea to make this shot monochrome and introduce color near the end, made it feel like the attack was so fast that the colors struggled to keep up. Next up on the list of fights, we have Reze vs Division 2, which started with some Yoshihara-corrected boxing, followed by Toshiyuki Sato's gorgeous effects and this incredibly cool Hayato Kurosaki sequence with aggressive foreshortening and his signature smoke animation. Of course, as per usual, things weren't perfect. This shot looked quite janky, Reze looking up wasn't exactly consistently animated, this explosion looked mediocre and Reze's movement around it was quite stiff. Plus whatever the f was happening with the background here, there were issues, let's not pretend otherwise, but again, they weren't significant. One thing I loved about the action in this movie, well, there were many things, but one of them was the way it was structured. The Division 2 fight was relatively grounded, Denji vs Reze was a bit more over the top, the Typhoon Devil fight was batshit insane, it kept building, and the final showdown was all up close and personal, which is the way it should be in my opinion. Reze vs Denji Round 1 was extremely dynamic with CGI vehicles and CGI assisted characters allowing for complex, spacious camera movement. The 2D 3D sync wasn't perfect, it's not ufotable, there were inconsistencies, but by and large the 3D use was quite solid. Both on screen and behind the scenes, it was better than Season 1 in my opinion, although that's a very apples to oranges comparison. The highlights of this fight included these disgustingly smooth slow-motion shots animated by Hayato Kurosaki, Bahi JD's slightly exaggerated but ultimately consistent acting, the buttery smooth violence kicks, the character acting on Kobeni, and this stylized acting sequence with those classic, wobbly, inconsistent but in a good way lines drawn by Hokuto Sakiyama with some additional Yoshihara corrections here and there. Amazing stuff. Up next, we had a quick bit of Aki vs Reze animated entirely by Koki Fujimoto, and unlike the visual chaos that was about to descend upon us in a few minutes, this was quite grounded and slow for lack of a better term. Every action had that trademark weight that Fujimoto is known for. If anything, it was the closest this movie got to Season 1 style of action. It was really impressive, although I wasn't terribly fond of those blender-assisted explosions. We then got some extremely over-the-top character acting animated by Toshiyuki Sato, the kind of sequence you'd never see in Season 1. Again, whether or not that's a good thing is entirely up to you. Sato's drawings were extremely loose, energetic, and fun, very anime-like if that makes sense. Typhoon's appearance was animated by Hisashi Mori with some good-looking background animation and unique line art, and with that we were all set for the visual insanity that was the Typhoon Devil fight. If I'm not mistaken, this entire thing was directed by Hone Hone, and it was the most spectacular section of this movie in that it was about as over the top as humanly possible. They kicked things off with some smooth background and wind animation, this insanely large-scale shot animated by Riki Matsura, and more top-notch effects, background and character animation. I've broken down many of these shots before, so I won't yap on about them here. A series of incredibly well-animated cuts with fantastic hair, fabric and wind animation then brought us to the bulk of the Typhoon Devil fight. And how does one go about breaking these scenes down? I don't know, do you? It was ridiculous, the sheer scale of the whole thing, the density of the effects, the fantastic storyboarding that conveyed both the scale and the chaotic energy CSM is known for perfectly, the amount of movement. It was insane. War Creek sequence was basically drugs in visual form, I don't know how else to describe it. It conveyed extreme speed by slowing things down to a crawl, which might sound counterproductive, but it works, very Hakuyo-go of him. Every action felt unimaginably heavy and forceful, especially the part where Reze and Denji seemingly went up in flames, such a cool series of ideas. We then got Saucelot sequence, quite possibly the highlight of this fight, and it too looked outlandishly good. The lifelike ragdolling, the warped backgrounds, the disgustingly large number of hand-drawn wires, the impact frames, the lineless drawings, the direct reference to Birdie, it was absolutely phenomenal. His sequence was immediately followed by Yurika Nakanishi's mind-melding first-person background animation and weighty character acting, and just to reiterate, all of this happened one after another. It went for Craig Soslot and Yurika Nakanishi with no buffer in between. They packed enough animation power to put entire 12-episode shows to shame into a few minutes of footage. Insanity. We weren't done, however. Some large-scale background animation and a solid Hone Hone sequence with some really cool shading then brought us to Keiichiro Watanabe's scene, and it was the most Watanabe sequence to ever Watanabe. The drawings were about as warped and distorted as humanly possible, with zero regard for both the design sheets and traditional anatomy, but that's the point, that's what he does. This sequence was just his flow over everything mentality, but dialed up to 11. How can you not like it? It's incredible. More insane, complex and dense animation followed. I've broken down some of it before, which hopefully excuses me skipping over a lot of these shots. Hey, the confines of time, am I right? There's nothing I can do about it. I loved this shot in particular. It visualized the scale and size difference between Denji and Typhoon perfectly. The depth of field blurring helped with that. Good stuff. And that brings us to the finale of this fight, animated by Shu Sugita, and what more can I say, it was insane. The tremendous effects density, the thick outlines, the insanely polished drawings, the diegetic color scheme change, and of course, the manga cover reference near the end. Absolute cinema, as the kids say. One of Sugita's best works, and that's saying something. And with that, Typhoon was out of the picture, but once again, we weren't done. It was time for Reze vs Denji Round 2, which in my opinion was the best part of this movie, visually speaking. It started off with Shinsaku Kozuma's easily recognizable effects animation, followed by some eerily volumetric movement animated by Bahi JD and Daniel Kim. I was particularly fond of the perspective work in this cut. We then got some gorgeous, detailed explosions animated by Kaito Tomioka, this heavy bit of background animation, and this cool Yutaka Nakamura-inspired series of strikes animated by Chris, and some amazing wind effects. And finally, after all of that, we got Julian Bentley's sequence, which in my opinion was the best part of this movie. Unpopular opinion perhaps? I don't know. Julian is a master of volume control, and this was him at his best. Not only was the body language absolutely flawless, the camera work was outstanding as well. Here's the thing, usually unsteady camera work in quotation marks because this is animation, there is no actual camera. Usually unsteady camera work tends to look really messy and poorly put together, but this was perfect. The wobbly camera motion and the subtle blurring was handled incredibly well, plus the 3D background and the realistic motion gave the sequence that added it factor. I don't know, it did something to my brain, it was so good. And that was the fight. I've run out of adjectives at this point. It was good, that's all I got. The movie still had more goodness to offer, of course. Some pretty liquid effects, 4 minutes straight of subtle acting animated by Tadashi Hiramatsu, some fantastic morphing, the list goes on, but hey, I'm tired and you get the idea. Such an incredible work, packed from front to back with absurd animation power, top-notch direction, and love and care, really. Ultimately, that's what all of it boils down to, love and care. This was a movie made by fans of the source material, and it showed. It was utterly insane, there's not much else I can say. And that's it, this was a long one, so let's wrap this up. A special thanks to Note03, Amir and the Gallus90 for becoming tier 3 members, and until next time.